Hello, I'm Michelle.
And I'm Laura, and this is the Pair Entrepreneurs Club podcast, a weekly show to help you navigate the demands of being a working parent.
We will share lots of practical ideas, hints and tips, and our own and others' experiences with juggling work, family, health and finances. Above all, we want to help you find your purpose, define your identity, and banish any confidence gremlins that might be holding you back from the life you dream of. No matter whether you have children or not, there will be something here for you. Let's get started.
Welcome to another episode of the Pair Entrepreneurs Club podcast. I'm Laura, and I'm joined today by my friend and co-host, Michelle. And today we want to talk to you about resilience. It's a topic that's been really important to us lately, and we want to explore really what is resilience. So if we think of an engineering term, for example, in scientific roots, a material can be bent and shaped and stretched, compressed, and yet it has that ability to actually bounce back. And that's really what we're talking about, is that humans ourselves have an innate capacity to be able to bounce back from adversity. And Michelle, we've talked a lot around our clients and our friends and the world we live in today. It's something that's very topical and hard for people to have that resilience when there's so much going on.
Absolutely. It's a really demanding world, and there's a lot of adversity with either health, family or work, and certainly we saw that a couple of years ago with COVID. So really that resilience piece is that mental process of behaviours that we use to protect ourselves against those sort of harmful effects or stressors. And I suppose a lot of us did experience that, particularly when we think about COVID. And that ability that we have to sort of adopt and flex those obstacles that we're presented with. And some people arguably will have less along the way, and some of us will have more. But we ultimately have to succumb to those stresses, and how much we wallow in those, or how much we kind of rise above them and explore that bounce back, as we call it. So we can see resilience like we're planning for that oncoming storm. And for us, we use a bit of analogy of you as an individual on a sailboat and navigating that storm. And as coaches, we're that lighthouse, and we'll come on to talk about this as we go through today's topic. But yeah, ultimately, I'm always intrigued at how one person can embrace those tough times while others kind of crumble. And if you think back to things in your own life, I certainly have been through slightly, large scale redundancies, and some people are really unfazed because maybe they've only got one thing going on at the time and they're slightly more resilient than others, while others are really, really struggling and they're crumbling and struggling to get to grips to it. So, and I think you're probably the same, Laura, we, even as individuals, we've probably got our own levels of resilience and how we deal and recognise things.
Absolutely, and I always say that age is one of the best lessons of actually teaching you how to be resilient. And I look back to when I was a teenager. So during my school years, I got bullied, and I lost my nana when I was 11. I was very close to my nana, and at that time I just started a secondary school, and those kind of factors of being bullied on top of that were extremely hard for me to deal with. And I can remember my dad or my parents saying at the time, they've called you such a name, like in the big grand scheme of things, what does that matter? Because, just brush it off. It doesn't matter. And that felt worse because I felt that although my parents were doing it with the best intentions, because they could see that view of, just don't worry about it. It really doesn't matter. I couldn't get that perspective because the way I was feeling at the time, I just couldn't get that view. And had someone, now going through the coaching, had someone said to me, actually, what could you do about it? And just embrace those emotions and those feelings and go, it's okay to feel like that, but what could you do yourself? It's so much more empowering than somebody having this positivity kind of upbeat, just do it this way, just forget about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And the theory says that, doesn't it? That ultimately, to build your resilience, you should surround yourself with those positive people. And I think as I've got older, I've kind of let friends go who are sort of the negative minis, and I've got closer with people who are always glass half full. But actually, when you're faced with adversity as a friend, that can be incredibly frustrating. I know I did it to you last week in the situation that we had, and it's quite annoying actually if someone's playing off a 10 and like, oh, happy clappy, it'll be fine, everything's fine, I'm great, everything's positive. So, let's get a positive person or a positive mentor in your world, you've got to be receptive to it. And actually, when there's adversity and challenge, sometimes having an external coach, or for some people on more of a medical perspective, having CBT or a counsellor, is incredibly important, because actually, friendship can be kind of distorted slightly if someone's coming from too much of a positive perspective. But day to day, being surrounded by that positive outlook certainly will help build your resilience, won't it?
100%. It depends on the kind of the crisis that you're dealing with as well. So if you use that as an example, I'm quite happy to talk about that. I mean, I'd had for listeners' perspective, I'd had a water leak in August last year, where my kitchen ceiling had completely come down. And we live in a house that we've renovated over the last 3 years. Everything had just kind of got to the point where we wanted to be. So I was absolutely devastated that this had happened. And since that point, we'd had 2 more water leaks, completely unrelated, in 6 months. So when I spoke to you, Michelle, last week, I was not in a good place, was I?
No. And I unhelpfully rang you and I was like, I'm playing off a 10, I've just bought a car. It was probably incredibly frustrating. But trying to be that positive person, and as I say, that can actually, I mean, in lightheartedness, the world was not ending. It was something that I knew by the following day you'd be okay with. But if you put that into more of a bigger perspective, like heaven forbid a family fatality or a major incident, having that positive friend or that kind of positive voice is actually quite dangerous sometimes. So, that's where a coach can be incredibly useful, just to reframe and ask the right questions. But just day to day, it is better for your general resilience to kind of have those people there that help and sort of pave that positive approach to stuff. And, let's look at glass half full instead of glass half empty. I just didn't remember when I'd had my first little girl, and you naturally make your NCT friends, don't you? And I surrounded myself with people who were really positive, because I just, for my own resilience of having a child and all the stuff that then came with that, and I'd had something that had happened the year before around that anniversary, and so for me, I wanted that positivity, and I opted to choose for those positive people. I didn't want people who were worrying and wittering about things at 3 a.m. and getting on a group WhatsApp. I wanted to be with people who actually wanted to go out and meet and go out and do stuff and just have that positive perspective. And we probably do that in work life as well, don't we? We kind of try and work, hence why we work together, work with people with both the same positive outlooks, as opposed to the people who kind of tread the water and say, oh, we can't do that, or we're never going to be able to do that. When you've got those setbacks, that really has a big impact on your resilience, doesn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I was speaking to someone the other day. They're a CEO of a company, and they're going through their both parents have been ill. They've been in hospital with various illnesses. They've got 2 children, really struggling in what they're doing. And actually, their focus is on, okay, so what can we be positive about? What can we be grateful for? We have that conversation.
Yeah.
And it's so uplifting, because you need that in those moments of time where you kind of floundering or in the darkness, and you have got a lot of worries. It's really important, more so, to focus on what are the good aspects. And I know from people that I know that go through life with one disaster after another. Now, some of it is, I know some really tragic circumstances, which there's nothing that they could have done, but it's how you deal with that and how you respond to that. And the camp that say, well, this always happens to me, and it becomes almost a self-fulfilling prophecy of disasters happen time after time, because they're focused on this always happens to me, so they're looking for that rather than the opposite.
Likewise, I'm a massive believer in that mindset of fostering success. Don't think about the negatives, think about how you're going to succeed at something, or how it can have a positive outcome. And I know in really adverse times that's really difficult to see, isn't it? But, just thinking about how you're going to get from A to B. And even if that's minute by minute or hour by hour, not necessarily days and months ahead. But yeah, completely agree, that mindset towards that. What does good look like? How am I going to feel? How is it going to look in the next few months or weeks compared to where I am now? And just reminding, if you've been in any adversity before, how you came through it, because that's incredibly important. You've got that strength and you've got those characteristics that you've somehow gone through that process and come out the other side. But as you say, sometimes if you aren't thinking in that mindset, then actually you wallow in it.
Yeah, and I think I was watching a Christmas movie with my son before Christmas, and there was a scene in it where the boy loses his dad, and I was like ready to cry. The whole story around it was actually, well, to have had love and be loved is to focus on that gratitude, because although you've lost and you feel devastated by that loss, it means you've had something to start with. And it's an awful period for people when you lose someone, and I think it's probably the worst to never go through. But it's to then look at, okay, well, what did I have to be able to feel that way?
Absolutely. And I think, for me as well, a big part of that piece going through that adversity is those social networks and connections that we have. So we talked about it then with some of the positive people around us, but actually it's beyond that, isn't it? It's the community that we've got. So people who have low resilience and really struggle with that bounce back are generally people who haven't got someone to talk to, or they struggle to share those emotions and don't have that connection with people. So it's a really great way of building that resilience, just actually building those social connections as well. And as coaches, we talk about network no end, don't we? Constantly, what's your network? Who can you go to? What does that consist of? And I think that's incredibly important when it comes to resilience, because you've got people around you then you can bounce back with, and who can support you through those times.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, for anybody that faces challenges, it's realizing that you can't avoid adversity in life. So exactly as you said, find the support where you need it, whether that's friends, family, professionals, but also never underestimate your own strength, because you will get through it. You do have the ability to get through it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I remember having Francesca, my first, going back to my corporate job, and it was perfect. I absolutely loved it. On paper, it ticked all the boxes. They were very accommodating with my part-time return. And then 6 months later, the business had gone into administration, and everyone around me was like, "Oh my God, how are you going to cope? You're getting married next." Well, I was literally getting married 3 months down the line. How are you going to manage? How are you going to cope? And I kind of faced it with, I think I'm fairly resilient. I kind of tried to bounce back fairly quick in situations, and I just saw it as another opportunity. And I really tried to look at that optimistic future and thought, I've wanted in my development plan to be self-employed, and I've been quite comfortable here. I've got some redundancy money. I'm being paid by the administrators for 2 months, so I can sit here and build my website and set my business up. And yeah, it might fail, but actually, I need to have the confidence. I need to know what my skills are. I need to be surrounded by the positive people who can tell me that I can do it and grow from that, as opposed to being in that headspace. So for me at that time, I appointed a coach because I kind of felt that actually speaking to my husband or speaking to my personal network, they all had different conflicting opinions. My husband was thinking about the fact that we've just had a baby, we're going to get married. I'll be there for you, don't worry, we'll be fine. I didn't want to hear that, as much as it was nice. Whereas the coach could actually signpost me, literally ask the right questions. How are you going to come back from this? What's a year going to look like? Where are you going to be in 12 months' time? What does a business look like? Don't think about goals, just think about progress. Where do you want to be? So I think for me, on paper, it was an awful situation. I've probably had 3 or 4 of those on paper situations in my working career. But actually, I look back now and think it really did make me stronger. And it got me to where I wanted to be. So yeah, I think we see it a lot with our clients as well, but it's obviously a bit difficult to share some of those on a podcast.
Yeah, definitely. It is that they say coaching is an investment in yourself, but it really is. It's being able to actually sit back and harness your inner strength.
Yeah.
So, to really understand yourself and how you can move out of that, and how you're actually triggered by past things that have happened. So even for me now, if I think of sometimes somebody might say something that actually triggers my 11-year-old self that was bullied, there's still a part of that there. So the coach enabled me to deal with that, because a lot of the reaction was because of past experiences that I'd not dealt with, and were still appearing. So yes, it's really, really powerful in that respect. And I think as a business owner as well, that roller coaster of the peaks and troughs that we go through. When I started my business, actually, I've talked about this before, putting yourself out on social media, I found that very, very difficult, because I almost felt like a bit of a fraud, because putting things out there when I'd just been in a corporate world, it just felt very alien to me. And it's taken 3-4 years to get to a point where I can actually do it and not really think about it too much. So it is, the more you do something, the more you face it head on, the easier it gets.
Absolutely. And I think as pair entrepreneurs, well, as parents and as business owners, there's two facets to it, isn't there? There's two hats that we wear. But actually, probably the main theme that we talk about in both capacities is that self-efficacy and self-confidence. And for some, it's that imposter syndrome. And it all comes back to that level of resilience, doesn't it? How do we then bounce back when we've got these challenges? So if we've got a client that's pulling away from us for whatever reason, or we've got a sick child, heaven forbid, and we're trying to work, it's a constant bouncing back from those situations that we do. And I think even if you just take 5 minutes now and think about the last month, so if you go back to December to now, what challenges have you faced and how have you bounced back? And it might not be the big stuff, it's not major life events necessarily, but from a work capacity and a parent capacity, it happens on a weekly basis in some capacity. And for some of us, as we said at the start, it's like water off a duck's back, because it's the small stuff and we've built our resilience and we've got coping mechanisms of how to deal with that. Whereas for others, it's the big bucket stuff. And it's the things that's either prohibiting them and distracting them from being the parent they want, or being the business owner that they want. So it can be quite debilitating if people can't get that bounce back. And we've certainly seen it, haven't we? Even particularly on the corporate side as well, where people have had these severe challenges and they just can't get back on that right course. And it's quite devastating to see.
Definitely. And it's recognizing when you need to ask for help, and exactly as you said earlier, that community. And I think it was Misha on our last podcast said about it takes a village to raise a child, but actually it takes a village to support an adult as well. We get sometimes trapped in that circle of I don't like asking for help. So to have resilience, you need to recognize when you're not able to cope and when you do need to ask somebody for support.
Absolutely. It can be a lonely place otherwise, can't it? And building from that, and I know from other topics we've talked about, like that building from that fear of failure, it sometimes, from a setback that you've had, it can be perceived as a failure. So those two can be intertwined in the same aspect, can't they? You might not want to go to the length of having a positive mentor, but try if you are going through any challenges, try and have positive people around you, the people who look for the hope and the future and can kind of be your cheerleaders and champions. And as we said, sometimes professionally, that is where a coach can speak volumes, particularly if it's quite a bigger life event that it could potentially be detrimental to those friendships. So that's a big one for me, and I think I've certainly learned that. Let's just recap on what we've talked about as techniques for building your resilience. So the first one we talked about was the positivity, thinking about surrounding yourself with positive people, and whether that is having what we call a positive mentor or just having a coach that can kind of hold those positive views in the situation that you're facing. The second one we mentioned then was that, so kind of interlinked really, having that support, that social support and those networks, really important to have people around you as a community. And then the third one was knowing your strengths. So how can you use your strengths to come through these challenging times? And again, those positive people and your community will help you unearth those if you're struggling. We actually do that through psychometrics as coaches, and that sometimes really brings it to light for people, getting a profile of what their strengths are and how they'll engage and work with people. And then, the fourth one for me would be developing that positive mindset, looking at where that success is going to come from. How can I be successful? Not necessarily thinking of goals, but just thinking about that actual desire. Where do I want to be? What does it look like? And painting that image and seeing it. So, having that optimism for the future as opposed to, glass half full as opposed to glass half empty. So they'd be my top ones that I would suggest, and just recapping on what our discussion's been there.
Definitely. And I think, my inspiration is always to have that end goal and that unwavering belief that you'll get there. And I I'm a massive Harry Potter geek, so I always look to J.K. Rowling, because if you look at her journey of how she was a single parent, used to go to coffee shops all the time, she was living on benefits, really, really struggling, and writing this book that she wholeheartedly believed in but got turned down and rejected so many times before eventually it got published on a limited run, and then obviously everybody knows her now. So that belief that she must have had in herself to keep going, and the resilience that she must have had, it was just incredible.
Absolutely.
And to kind of wrap up the podcast for me would be to quote the Dumbledore quote of happiness can be found even in the darkest of times, if only we remember to turn on the light.
Love that. Absolutely love that. Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Real life does come with real life struggles, and we have those storms that are going to come and disrupt our well-being and our work and our life, and they're inevitable parts of life. But ultimately, it's how we bounce back from those storms, and is what is our measure of that resilience, really. So whether it's stress, grief, trauma, or any other knockback that we might find, they're the strong foundations for how we storm that bad weather. So for us, how we adapt is ultimately how we're going to survive. And as coaches, we'll help build that focus for somebody. We'll look at the personal assets and that growth mindset and ask those open-ended questions. So if you are interested in how we can support you from a coaching perspective, and you'd like to explore your resilience or build on your resilience, then please get in touch and watch this space, because we're going to be launching a webinar about resilience and also a workshop. So we'd love to hear from you, and please like, share and subscribe to the podcast and engage with our socials. That'd be great. Hope you've enjoyed this episode, and we'll see you in the future.
Thank you for listening. We hope you enjoyed it. We rely heavily on word of mouth, so if you found value in this episode, please hit subscribe and share it with family and friends. If you'd like to find out a bit more about us, you can find us on our Facebook group, Pair Entrepreneurs Club, or alternatively on Instagram, parentrepreneurs_club. We hope you have a great week, and we look forward to talking to you next time.